Aloha and welcome back to the garden. I'm Miss Amber and I'm really excited for you to be joining me today. If you were with us last class, you might remember talking about soil and all the different kinds of soil that there are. And today we're going to be looking at a way that we can help make our soil really healthy. We're going to be talking and learning about composting. So what is composting? Well, it's a way that people like you and me can make really rich, healthy soil by recycling or reusing our food scraps and our yard waste. So think about the last meal that you ate. I want you to picture it in your head. Did you eat all of it, or were there some leftovers, or maybe some food scraps, things like an orange peel or bread crust, or maybe an empty chip bag or juice box? What do you normally do with that waste from your meal? Most people throw it away in a trash can, but have you ever wondered, where is away? When you throw something in your trash, where does it go after that? That waste or trash gets picked up and goes to a landfill. But what if we could take some of that waste, like the orange peels and the bread crusts, and turn it into something usable instead of sending it to a landfill to sit in a plastic bag forever? This is where composting comes in. To learn how composting works, let's look at how nature does it, because we can learn a lot from nature. So I want you to picture a forest full of trees. And in that forest, when a leaf falls from a tree, what happens to the leaf? Well, first, it lands on the ground where there's probably a lot of other fallen leaves. And then over a long time, it starts to dry out and starts to crumble into little pieces. And maybe some critters come along, some little insects and bugs, and they start eating that leaf and break it down into even smaller pieces. And it keeps breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces until it breaks down into its smallest form and becomes part of the soil. This natural process of breaking things down is called decomposition. Have you heard that word before? Repeat after me. Decomposition. Decomposition is an important part of the life cycle of all living things. It's the process of breaking down organic matter, or things that used to be alive, into smaller organic material that can be reused. In nature, nothing is wasted. It all gets broken down and turned into something new, like soil. And we can copy nature and turn our food waste into soil too. And we call this composting. Now, what can we compost? Well, anything that is a plant or is made from a plant can be composted. So if it grew out of the ground, it can go back in the ground. So how do we turn this leftover food waste into compost? Well, luckily, there is a pretty easy recipe for making compost that we can follow. There are 4 ingredients. We need greens, which add nitrogen, browns, which add carbon, and water and air. Our nitrogen-rich greens can be many things, but they're always plant material. Normally we think of things like the tops of carrots or apple cores or orange peels, but there are lots of less obvious foods than fruits and vegetables that are also made out of plants. Can you think of anything that you eat that might be made out of a plant? Here are a few examples that I thought of. Bread and pasta are made out of grains, which come from a plant, and tea and coffee both come from plants. Even ketchup and mustard are plant-based. Now, not everything we eat comes from a plant, right? So not all of our food scraps can be composted. Any foods that come from an animal, like meat or dairy products like milk and yogurt and cheese and eggs, those things shouldn't go in our compost because it can make it really smelly and it can attract animals like rats and mice that we don't want in our compost. The one exception to this is eggshells. Eggshells are actually really good for our compost. Okay, so we know that our greens are plant material, or plant-based food, right? So what are our browns? Our browns are any plant material that's dead and dried out, like dried out leaves, twigs, sticks, dried grass, and even paper products. Because what is paper made out of? Trees. And trees are a plant that grows out of the ground. So anything made of paper and made of trees can go back into the ground. Things like paper bags and paper towels, newspapers, all of those things are compostable. So our first two ingredients for compost are greens and browns. And with the right ratio of greens to browns, or nitrogen to carbon, plus our other two ingredients, water and air, we create the perfect environment for our compost FBI. FBI stands for fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates. And these organisms, or living things, are known as decomposers. Decomposers are responsible for helping break everything down in the decomposition process and in our compost. Fungus are things like mold and mushrooms, and some are microscopic like bacteria, meaning you can only see them with a microscope. Billions of microscopic bacteria take on a large role in decomposing all of our food waste. They also play a really important role in the nitrogen cycle, turning unusable nitrogen into usable nitrogen that plants need in order to grow. Lastly, invertebrates are things like worms and centipedes and insects that you can actually see moving around in your compost pile. In a later lesson, we're going to take a closer look at the soil food web. Like all living things, the fungus, bacteria, and invertebrates in our soil need water and air to survive. And so by keeping our compost nice and moist and by mixing it every once in a while to give it fresh air, we're giving those FBI everything they need to help break down our compost. So when we combine all of these things, our food scraps, our grass trimmings, our dried leaves and paper products, and some water and air, and we mix it all together, we turn this waste into usable compost soil. And then we can use this compost soil to grow new fruits and veggies for us to eat. And when we eat those and we have our food scraps left over, what can we do with those? We can compost them back into soil and grow new fruits and veggies again. What a cool cycle to be part of. So let's see what this actually looks like, and let's build a small compost system in a jar together. In this activity, we're going to add all of our compost ingredients together in a jar and see what happens. Here, I've collected some food scraps from my kitchen, things like coffee grounds and apple cores and vegetable peelings from cucumbers and carrots. I also have some yard waste, dried leaves and grass, as well as some fresh grass cuttings and green leaves. And lastly, I have some brown paper to use as an additional carbon source. Which of my ingredients are greens or nitrogen sources, and which are browns or carbon sources? So we're going to start by adding a little bit of soil into our jar first, and this is going to help introduce some of those FBI critters quickly into our compost. And now we'll begin layering all of our greens and browns a little bit at a time, one on top of the other, and you can use any greens and browns in small layers. I'm going to add this apple core towards the edge so we can see what happens to it over time. You'll notice that I'm tearing everything into really small little pieces, and this makes it easier to break down for the FBI. Imagine you're eating a pizza. It's really hard to just eat a whole pizza all in one piece, but when you cut it up into smaller pieces, It makes it a lot easier to eat it. Same idea for the FBI. Once our jar starts to fill up, we'll end with a nice layer of browns, and then it's time to add a little bit of water to keep our compost soil nice and moist. So our very last step is to add the lid, and because we want airflow, I'm actually going to make a paper lid for my jar so I can poke holes in it. And now that we've added our greens and browns and water and air, our compost jar is finished, and we'll set it out in the sun and see what happens. How long do you think it will take to turn into soil? Mahalo for joining me in the garden today, and aloha.